Look at a billionaire CEO, an untouchable politician, or even just an incredibly intimidating, high-status leader in your own industry.
Right, the kind of person who just radiates authority.
Yeah, exactly. You see the wealth, the influence, that perfectly tailored confidence,
Oh, totally.
and you look at that outward projection of absolute power, and you naturally assume they are entirely in control of their own lives.
You think they're the ones pulling the strings.
Right. But what if that outward power is actually a mask for a terrifying total loss of personal agency?
A complete lack of control.
Yeah, what if the people who appear to run the world are actually just trapped inside a machine they can't control?
That is the big question.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking the conceptual framework of the human trap. It is a look at the engineering of coercion, how systems of power use blackmail, entanglement, and psychological pressure to completely hollow out an individual.
It's a really fascinating, albeit dark, structural analysis.
Okay, let's unpack this because the best way I can describe what we are looking at is to compare it to one of those woven Chinese finger traps you played with as a kid.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You slide your fingers in easily enough, it feels like a game, but the moment you realize you want out and you try to pull away using conventional force, the system grips you even tighter.
It uses your own momentum against you.
Exactly. The harder you fight it, the more trapped you become.
That visual perfectly captures the mechanics we are analyzing today. And what is so vital about this perspective is that it forces us to look right past the sensationalism of public scandals.
The flashy headlines and the cheap gossip, right?
Exactly. Instead of gossiping, we are examining the cold structural engineering of how these traps are actually built and maintained.
Which is way more terrifying than the gossip, honestly.
It really is. We aren't looking at this as some, simplistic morality play where good people stay good and bad people do bad things.
Right, it's not a comic book.
No, not at all. We are looking at the architecture of compromise. We are breaking down how a system systematically strips a person of their autonomy, rewires their psychology, and, does it all while making it look to the outside world like they're acting of their own free will.
Which is the most terrifying part. And before we can really understand the profound psychological toll of being stuck inside that cage, we need to understand the mechanics of the cage itself.
Yeah, how it's actually built.
Yeah, because people don't just wake up one day and decide to sell their soul. There isn't like a literal trap door in the floor that you fall through. It's a process.
Exactly. It is a highly specific, recurring 5-step mechanism of entrapment.
5 steps.
Yes, and it's a formula that works precisely because it doesn't look like a trap from the outside.
It looks like success.
Right. It begins with step 1, which is gradual involvement. You can think of this as the honeymoon phase.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
Well, an individual becomes connected to a powerful group, a highly lucrative opportunity, or an elite network. It feels like a standard, exciting progression of their success.
They're getting their foot in the door.
Exactly. You are getting mentored, you're being elevated, you're getting access to rooms you've never been in before.
Right. It's immensely flattering. I mean, you are being invited into the inner circle, and human beings are biologically wired to seek out that kind of tribal acceptance and status.
Yeah.
You feel like you finally made it.
Precisely. You feel chosen. But once that psychological safety is established, the system moves to step 2.
Which is?
Boundary crossing.
Well,
Once the person is inside the tent, they are gently encouraged or sometimes subtly pressured into actions that conflict with their own internal moral compass.
So they're asked to do something shady.
Yes. But it is crucial to understand that this is almost always minor at first.
Like not a massive crime.
Exactly. It might be looking the other way on a small compliance issue or participating in a conversation that feels a little unethical.
Or signing off on an expense report that you know is slightly fabricated.
Perfect example. Just a small bending of the rules.
Okay, wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Because if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, surely at step 2, that first boundary crossing, most decent people would just say no, right?
You would think so.
Yeah, I mean, if your new boss invites you to do something that clearly violates your morals, wouldn't the average person just put their foot down or walk away?
It is a completely logical question, but it ignores the intense contextual pressure of the environment.
The pressure of being the new person in the inner circle.
Exactly. You have to remember, it is never presented as a massive crime on day 1. It is framed as a tiny favor.
A favor. Right.
It's a small concession to prove you are a team player or a test of your loyalty to the people who just gave you this massive opportunity in step one.
Oh, wow. So they leverage your gratitude.
Yes. Because you are already invested and because you value your new place in this network, the psychological friction of saying no to a tiny favor feels much higher than the friction of just going along with it once.
It makes me think of how our brains process environments, like the whole boiling frog thing.
Exactly like that.
It's less about some sudden, dramatic moral test and more like walking into a room with a terrible smell. At first, it's overwhelming, you want to leave.
Right, your instinct is to run.
But if you force yourself to stay in the room because the conversation is important, your olfactory receptors literally fatigue. 10 minutes later, you don't even realize you're breathing toxic air. You've just adjusted to the new baseline.
That is exactly it.
The moral degradation happens the exact same way. You cross the boundary, the sky doesn't fall, and your brain just adjusts the baseline.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it because cognitive dissonance won't let us believe we are bad people.
Right, we have to justify it to ourselves.
So the brain justifies the bad smell. It justifies the minor compromise. But here is the structural trap.
What happens next?
Once you adjust to that new baseline, you move immediately into step 3, which is documentation, or the exposure risk.
Oh, man.
Now that you've crossed that boundary, even slightly, evidence of your action exists within the system.
The compromise has been logged.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be a cartoonish hidden camera in a hotel room.
Right, it's not a spy movie.
Exactly. It might be a digital paper trail, a CC'd email, a financial transfer, or simply the shared knowledge of other powerful people in the room.
So there are witnesses.
The system now possesses proof that you are capable of operating outside the rules. You are officially compromised.
And I imagine the system doesn't just file that away for a rainy day. That brings us to step 4, right? Leverage and silence.
Exactly.
If I'm following the mechanics here, the system doesn't even need to verbally threaten you at this point. The threat is implicit.
You hit the nail on the head. The receipt from step 3 is immediately weaponized as leverage. The possibility of exposure becomes the primary tool of control. The people running the network don't have to pull you into a dark alley and say, do what we want or we ruin you.
Right. They don't have to be cartoon villains.
No. The mere existence of that documentation combined with the power of the network does all the heavy lifting.
Because you know what they could do to you.
The implied threat of what would happen to your career, your family stability, or your public reputation if that one tiny favor got out is more than enough to ensure your silence.
And your ongoing compliance. Which brings us to the final devastating snap of the trap, step 5, ongoing participation.
The terminal stage.
Yeah. The individual continues to act within the system, but the motivation is completely inverted. They are no longer acting out of ambition or desire.
Not at all.
They're acting out of a perceived absolute necessity. They realize that every single available path forward leads to a massive catastrophic loss.
That is the defining feature of the human trap. The illusion of choice is completely stripped away, leaving only the mechanics of survival.
Because they're stuck.
If the person stays, it means continuing to do things they do not align with. They are morally compromising themselves daily, expanding the leverage the system has against them.
Making the trap even deeper.
Exactly. But if they leave, it means exposure, punishment, legal ruin, or complete social and professional destruction. They are paralyzed.
So once that paralysis sets in, once the trap is snapped shut, the logical question you might ask from the outside looking in is, why not just walk away and take the hit?
Right, take your medicine.
Yeah, rip the Band-Aid off, face the music, serve the time, and get your actual life back. But that leads us directly into the psychological erosion that keeps people glued in place.
The internal barriers to leaving.
And honestly, understanding this changes how you view every scandal on the evening news.
It absolutely does. Because the emotional realities of the trapped individual are devastating. We often picture corrupt people sitting in a penthouse, laughing while swirling a glass of cognac.
Like they're enjoying it.
Right. But the reality is a profound, agonizing loss of identity. They literally feel unlike their original self.
They don't recognize who they are anymore.
To survive the daily contradiction of doing things they internally hate, their brain has to engage in extreme emotional compartmentalization.
Right. The brain literally segments the trauma to prevent a total psychological breakdown.
Exactly.
The person they are at home with their kids has to neurologically disconnect from the person they are at work, signing off on toxic policies.
Mm.
They build walls inside their own mind just to get through the day.
Yes. And behind those mental walls is a festering mix of shame combined with complete dependency.
Dependency on the trap itself.
Yeah, they hate the system that is trapping them, but they also rely on it entirely. It provides their status, their income, and ironically, it provides their protection from the very secrets the system holds over them.
Wow, that is twisted.
Over time, this creates a state where a person feels they no longer even know how to exit or who they would possibly be outside of this protective, abusive structure.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the forces holding them in place aren't just the bad guys at the top pointing a finger. It's a complex web of internal and external fears.
It's multi-layered.
Sure, they fear the public exposure and the legal consequences, but here is the insidious part. They often stay because they believe leaving will harm others more.
The collateral damage.
Exactly. They worry about the collateral damage to their spouse, their children, or the innocent colleagues who might go down with the ship.
And that guilt keeps them frozen.
Furthermore, they have absolutely no outside support system left because the trap systematically isolates them from anyone outside the network.
That isolation breeds what clinical psychologists call learned helplessness.
Learn helplessness.
Yeah. If you put an animal in a cage and give it a mild shock every time it touches the door, eventually it stops trying the door.
It just gives up.
Even if you unlock the cage and leave it wide open, the animal will sit in the corner and endure the shocks. The trapped human operates the exact same way.
That is so dark.
They try to push against the boundaries early on, they get disciplined or threatened by the system, and eventually they just stop trying to escape. They accept the cage as their permanent, inescapable reality.
Because they simply do not see a survivable path out.
Exactly.
Leaving a situation like this isn't just about opening a physical door and walking out of a building. It's more like trying to uninstall an operating system while the computer is still running.
Oh, that is a perfect way to put it.
You have to rebuild your identity, rewrite your core programming from a completely fractured state while you are actively being attacked by the very network you are trying to disconnect from.
It's an overwhelming task.
It is almost mathematically impossible to do that without incredibly visible, safe external pathways for an exit.
And this intense psychological disintegration, what we are describing as the collapse of self-integrity, is absolutely crucial to understand.
Why is that?
Because it explains the extreme, almost supernatural language that society instinctively uses to describe these people once they are finally exposed.
Right. When a massive scandal breaks, we don't just call the perpetrators compromised individuals or victims of structural leverage. We call them monsters. We use the language of horror movies.
We do. And what is so fascinating about analyzing this structurally is decoding those specific monster metaphors.
Okay, lay them out for us.
Terms like demon, vampire, reptile, or zombie aren't just colorful insults thrown around on social media.
Right.
They are actually highly accurate, symbolic representations of very specific moral and psychological states that occur when a human being's self-integrity completely collapses.
Okay, I wanted to dive deep into these because I always thought calling a corrupt politician a vampire or a demon was just cheap name calling.
It's much deeper than that.
But there is an actual psychological mechanism here. Let's start with the demon. What does that actually represent in the context of the human trap?
The demon metaphor represents a person acting in ways that directly contradict their own foundational moral core. Think about the mythology. A demon is traditionally a fallen entity. It is something that was originally meant for light, but now operates exclusively in darkness.
Right, they fell from grace.
When we intuitively call someone a demon in a corporate or political context, we are recognizing that their actions are fundamentally misaligned with basic human morality.
So they aren't some alien species.
No, they are a corrupted human. They have fallen from their original values because the trap forced them to abandon their moral compass to survive.
Man, that's heavy. And what about the vampire? That one gets thrown around constantly. You hear about vampire squids in finance? Or emotional vampires in the workplace?
The vampire metaphor is about sustaining oneself through others in an intensely imbalanced, parasitic way.
Feeding off others.
A person who has been in this human trap for years is often completely hollowed out inside. They have lost their vitality, their authentic confidence, and their sense of self. They are empty.
So they have to take it from somewhere else.
So, To survive and maintain their facade of power, they have to feed off the energy, the resources, or the blind compliance of the people below them.
Oh, wow.
They drain the life force of their subordinates or the public because they literally cannot generate their own authentic life force anymore.
That paints such a vivid picture of a toxic boss
Oh,
who
yeah.
takes credit for your work while simultaneously destroying your self-esteem. They do it because they are empty.
Exactly.
Then there's the reptile. To me, that sounds like a complete lack of emotion,
Oh,
a coldness.
you're spot on. The reptile symbolizes a brain operating purely in survival mode. It's an amygdala hijack.
An amygdala hijack.
When you are trapped, constantly terrified of exposure, and managing a complex web of leverage and lies, you simply cannot afford the biological luxury of higher-order emotions like empathy, guilt, or compassion.
You literally don't have the bandwidth for it.
Those emotions are liabilities when you are in danger. So you revert to the brainstem, the reptilian brain.
Just fight or flight.
You become instinct-driven, cold-blooded, and hyper-calculating, evaluating every single human interaction purely through the lens of threat assessment.
They're just trying to survive the next 10 minutes.
Exactly.
And finally, the zombie, which feels like the ultimate terminal end stage of the trap.
It is the terminal stage. The zombie metaphor captures the total, absolute loss of autonomy. It is the state of moving without any conscious alignment.
The lights are on, but nobody's home.
Yes. The person is technically animating a physical body. They are giving keynote speeches, signing international documents, shaking hands at galas. But the soul, the core personal agency, is entirely gone.
They're just a puppet.
They are nothing more than a fleshy vessel executing the coded commands of the system that owns them.
But let me jump in here and really challenge this framing.
Go ahead.
Because if we are breaking this down, I have to ask, do they choose this? When we use words like vampire and demon, it implies a malicious, deliberate intent. Do these people actually want to be this way? Or is losing one's soul just a tragic psychological coping mechanism? Because part of me feels like saying the system made them do it is letting some very dangerous, destructive people entirely off the hook.
That tension you are feeling is the exact center of this entire issue. Recognizing the mechanics of the trap does not absolve the individual of the harm they cause.
Okay, good.
However, assuming that they just want to be evil is a massive, comforting oversimplification. It lets us off the hook from having to understand how fragile human morality actually is.
It's easier to just call them bad apples.
Exactly. Now, yes, some individuals may eventually adapt to the system, embrace the power, and become willing, sadistic architects of the trap for the next generation.
They lean into the villain role because it's the only power they have left.
Precisely. But the research and historical accounts suggest that the vast majority exist in an agonizing, shifting state between internal resistance and outward participation.
They're constantly fighting themselves.
Their monstrous behavior isn't born from pure cartoonish malice. It emerges from a crushing, compounding combination of psychological pressure, constant fear, incremental conditioning, and a perceived absolute lack of alternatives.
It's death by 1,000 cuts.
The idea of losing one's soul isn't a sudden literal transaction with the devil. It is the slow, agonizing, psychological disintegration of a person whose actions no longer match their inner values day after day, year after year.
So if this devastating structural process can happen to an individual, what are the environmental conditions that allow these human traps to form in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question.
Where do these systems breed? Because I think the natural, comforting assumption is that this kind of elaborate coercion only happens in shadowy, elite cabals or international spy agencies or the highest levels of global politics.
And that is an incredibly dangerous assumption to make.
Because it happens everywhere.
If we connect this framework to the broader world, it becomes clear that this pattern of coercion can emerge anywhere that specific structural flaws exist. It is not limited to a specific tax bracket or a secret society. It is a predictable outcome of bad structural engineering.
So if it's a mechanical process, there has to be a specific environment that allows the machine to operate.
Yeah.
You don't see this happening in completely transparent, healthy organizations. What are the structural ingredients?
There are 4 primary ingredients that create the blueprint for a trap. First, power is heavily and rigidly concentrated in the hands of a few untouchable individuals.
Yeah, concentration of power.
Second, absolute secrecy is maintained around operations, communications, and decision-making. Information is siloed.
Secrecy. Got it.
Third, accountability is weak or entirely non-existent, meaning the stated rules of the organization simply do not apply to the people at the very top.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
Exactly. And fourth, the environment actively encourages the easy acquisition of leverage over individuals, often by blurring professional and personal boundaries.
Wow. And this is exactly why you, the listener, need to care about this.
Mm.
Because those four ingredients, they don't just exist in geopolitical thrillers or mafia movies.
Not at all.
Those exact structural red flags can exist in a toxic corporate culture at a mid-level marketing firm. They can exist in a highly insular religious community. They can exist in a competitive academic department, a local charity board, or even within a really toxic neighborhood social circle.
It's universal.
Understanding this architecture allows you to recognize how these systems form before you ever accept the invitation to step one and get entangled yourself.
That is the ultimate practical application of this knowledge. If you walk into a new job, a new church, or a new social organization, and you immediately notice that power is entirely concentrated, secrets are traded as currency, accountability is a joke, and people seem to be kept in line by a subtle fear of what the leadership knows about them.
Right.
You are not just looking at a bad culture, you are looking at the exact blueprint of a human trap. Walk away while you still have the agency to do so.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom all the way out and look at the whole picture, I think the biggest, most paradigm-shifting takeaway is how we view the villains in our society.
It really changes your perspective.
The image of the demon or the monster isn't actually a story about pure, inherent evil at all. It's really a story about restricted agency.
A total loss of freedom.
It's a horrifying clinical look at what a human mind becomes when it feels that exit is impossible and identity fractures under the crushing weight of its own compromised actions.
It is the ultimate tragic disconnect. The core tension we have to grapple with is the vast silent gap between who a person fundamentally is, what they are being forced to do to survive, and what they genuinely feel they're allowed to change about their situation.
It's tragic, honestly.
Recognizing that tension, understanding the pain of that disconnect, doesn't excuse the damage they might do to society, but it is absolutely essential if we ever want to dismantle the mechanics of the systems that shape them.
You have to know how it works.
You cannot break a machine if you refuse to understand how its gears turn.
Exactly. You have to study the cage to free the animal. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today, but I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over on your own.
What's that?
It builds on everything we just discussed regarding the escape problem. We established that leaving these traps requires enduring intense public judgment, facing massive legal or social consequences, and desperately needing outside support to rebuild a shattered identity.
Right, it's incredibly difficult.
But look at how our society currently operates. Look at the internet. We are incredibly harsh, unforgiving, and universally punitive toward fallen or compromised figures.
Cancel culture, public shaming.
Exactly. The moment someone steps out of line or the moment a compromised person is exposed, the public square demands nothing less than their total, permanent destruction.
We want to burn them at the stake.
But if we make exit socially unsurvivable, if there is no grace, no path to redemption, and absolutely no safe harbor for people who actually want to break free and blow the whistle, aren't we as a public accidentally helping these human traps stay closed?
That is a very unsettling thought.
If we ensure that leaving the trap guarantees your total ruin, aren't we just guaranteed that the zombies and demons stay trapped in the system, turning the crank forever?
Because they have nowhere else to go.
Just like that Chinese finger trap, the harder the public pulls, the tighter the system's grip becomes on the people stuck inside it.
We become part of the machine.
Something to think about the next time you see a scandal breaking on your feed. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden structures around you. Keep looking for the mechanical gears behind the curtain, and we will see you next time.